It may come as a surprise to some of you, but I am a huge fan of liminal spaces. Transitional spaces between a beginning and an end. Places that aren't destinations, but merely areas you go through or see in passing. A fascination with the boundaries between worlds isn't anything new to the human race. Throughout folklore and mythology, there is a large focus on the bridges and overlaps between worlds. The Bifrost, the river Styx, Purgatory, Samhain, when the veil between the realm of the living and dead is thin, known today as Halloween. We can see these mythological thresholds reflected in our day-to-day lives. A long alleyway that empties into a bright street, a stairway that leads into darkness, an empty shopping center with a circle of equally empty chairs. Something about these photos has the potential to evoke a strange cocktail of emotions: whimsy, melancholy, nostalgia, and maybe even the tiniest sense of strangely comforting dread. But what does liminality really mean? An empty space that's normally crowded with people? A place shrouded in darkness that's normally bright and lively? Something nostalgic that was plucked from your memories? A place with sentience that knows you, sees you, changes based on who you are? That's what I'd like to talk about today.
Found a place. It's massive in there. It just goes on and on and on. All these rooms. This place built. Actually, more like it remembers them. And the more times it remembers something, the less it does.
So I'd like to start off by saying that I am aware there's already piles and piles of video essays on liminality. While I hope to have something new to add to the conversation, I'll try not to worry too much about being original and just focus on having fun talking about a subgenre of horror that I've learned to love. I'll be going through a comprehensive timeline of liminality, listing and talking about media, real-life places, and practices that I think have contributed to the modern understanding of the concept. So, without further ado, let's get started. The concept of liminality is far older than you might have realized. The earliest use of the term liminal could be tracked all the way back to the 1870s. It's derived from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. If you think about it, there's another word with liminal in it that you probably already knew: preliminal, or preliminary. The original French word préliminaire, I'm sorry, all French people, was used to reference diplomatic negotiations to end the 30 Years' War, way back in the 1650s. The word literally means before the threshold, or rather, leading up to something important. There's also subliminal, of course, below the threshold, which I feel subliminally contributes a bit more to today's understanding of the word liminal. Funny enough, the named concept of liminality wasn't really touched upon until Arnold van Gennep's book, Le Rite de Passage, in 1909. Sorry again, all French people. Van Gennep was an ethnographer and folklorist who worked and studied among many different cultures and societies. A through line he noticed between the many different peoples of Africa and Oceania was that important stages of life, birth, puberty, marriage, and death, were commemorated in some way through every culture. Human beings love to celebrate transitions from one phase of life to the other. He called these celebrations rites of passage, breaking them into three separate parts: preliminal, the separation from the previous life; liminal, the transition from one stage to the other; and postliminal, the introduction to the new stage of life. In Western culture, pregnancy is often followed by a baby shower to celebrate the incoming birth. This would be the preliminary celebration, whereas the postliminal celebration, the baby is born, and the one who birthed them is now officially a parent. The state of liminality in between would, of course, be the act of actually giving birth. Genup describes the liminal state as one where one's sense of identity dissolves, bringing about disorientation. While Genup introduced the idea of liminality with the rites of passage, cultural anthropologist Victor Turner expanded heavily on the concept. He describes liminal beings as no longer classified and not yet classified. They do not belong to where they came from or where they're going. They are betwixt and between. All that in mind, you could say almost anything is in a liminal state. Being alive is a liminal state, between life and death. Liquid is a liminal state of matter, between gas and solid. Your walk to the gym is a liminal state. But I believe what's important about the stage of liminality is not that it's between two other stages, but rather, it doesn't belong to what came before it or what comes after it. Not to mention, it's meant to be a truly transformative state, like the chrysalis that turns a caterpillar into a butterfly. Not only that, but the liminal state is meant to be temporary. Most people don't go to an airport or train station to stay there. It's a means to get to another place. When you're a teenager, you're no longer a child, but not yet an adult. And you won't, and shouldn't, stay a teenager forever. And you can't go back to being a child. Von Genup and Turner both talked about liminality when it came to the human experience. But when did this concept start getting applied to spaces? Let's go a little backwards. The term liminal space wasn't quite coined or made aware of until the 2010s, but I want to talk about explorations of liminal spaces before we even had a term for it. Considering modern examples of liminal spaces are most popularly through photographs, it would make sense to explore the history of photography to see what we can find. It just so happens the oldest surviving photograph from the early 1800s, view from the window at Le Gras, is a shot of the rooftops outside of Nicephore Niepce's apartment. I'm not going to apologize to French people anymore, I'm sorry. Considering early photography took several minutes to hours to even days of exposure when photography was first practiced, many of the first photos taken were of empty spaces. The exposure time for the window at Le Gras, according to the sunlight striking the buildings on both sides, must have taken 8 hours or more. Could these old photos of empty streets and rooftops be considered liminal in the technical sense? In my opinion, you can't really call a space liminal just because it's empty. Though for certain places, the emptiness is their liminal state. Shopping centers, theme parks, parking lots, movie theaters. These are all places that, when in operation, are meant to be bustling with life. If they're empty, you very well could say that they're betwixt and between, and don't feel quite right. But if we're gonna be more technical, a supermarket just being closed and empty for the night isn't quite liminal. This is a state that it returns to every night, much like how we go to sleep every night. Because the preliminal and post-liminal states are the same, awake for us and open for a supermarket, the liminal state isn't quite transitory or transformative. However, a supermarket that just got built, with all the shelves fresh, new, and ready to be filled, now that's what I call liminal. Personal anecdote here, I used to work at Target, and my job was literally transitioning sections of the store. You know when you go to Target, and the peanut butter is suddenly on the opposite side of the aisle for some reason? Yeah, that was my job. I was the liminal guy. While I wouldn't call any of these old photos from the 1800s particularly liminal, you could argue they are simply because of the state of the technology. Photography was in a transitionary state. It wasn't quite up to par with what it would eventually be. In my opinion, the eeriness of a so-called liminal space simply comes from the space itself being unexplainably off-putting. You put an explanation or a ghost story behind it, it loses its initial charm. You edit in a creepy silhouette instead of letting my mind play tricks on me, and it's no longer eerie in the way it was originally supposed to be. Which brings me to a real-life example of a place I would consider a liminal space. The Winchester Mystery House, a Victorian mansion from the late 1800s, in perpetual construction until the day Sarah Winchester passed away. If you're unfamiliar with the Winchester Mystery House, the story goes as such. Here is an excerpt from the U.S. Ghost Adventures website. The Winchester Mystery House truly lives up to its name. The monstrous 24,000 square foot estate has secrets hiding around every corner. From stairwells that go nowhere, to skylights in floors, to a second-story door that opens to thin air. The massive mansion has shocked visitors for over a century. Yet, the home's owner, Sarah Winchester, didn't care what society thought about her residents. She had a singular focus: to continually build a labyrinth of a home. Because as long as she built, she stayed alive, and the more confusing she made her home, the harder it was for the spirits killed by her family fortune to find her. Except that's all complete bullshit. Yes, it's true that the Winchester house has questionable architecture. I actually took a tour with some friends several years ago. While I'll admit that the fabricated ghost story is very fun and clever, that's not what makes this place interesting to me. You don't need a ghost story to make an old building with wacky, weird architecture interesting. Side note, I may be biased and bitter, being the spokesperson and social media manager for an old theater from the 1920s. That's the most common question is it haunted? Which, yeah, everywhere is haunted, but that's boring. Anyway, support the Kenosha Theater. What makes the Winchester Mystery House interesting to me is not knowing why Sarah Winchester was constantly having construction done, not knowing why there are stairs that lead to nowhere, not having the answers. And of course, the fact that this building was in a constant state of construction for 36 straight years means that it was in a constant state of liminality. And it's true. No one actually knows why she had her mansion built like that. I personally think it was a fun mixture of her having a deep fascination with architecture and perhaps just wanted to give the construction workers job security. And hey, maybe she wanted a little whimsy in life, who knows? The fun thing is, we don't know, and we probably never will. The ghost story was fabricated by the buyers of the mansion after her death to make it a tourist hotspot. And hey, it worked, I guess, but at the cost of an actually interesting mystery. This is a hole a lot of horror stories tend to fall into. Trading the more subtle, disquieting horror of something and replacing it with far more in-your-face horror. We're going to call this mascotification. Put a pin in that, because we'll get back to it. A building in a state of constant construction is off-putting in and of itself. Liminal states generally aren't meant to be lingered in, much how you shouldn't linger in doorways.
It's ruined.
But there are definitely other examples of liminal spaces in media where people overstay their welcome and end up suffering because of it. The Shining is a book published by my favorite author, Stephen King, in 1977. With the arguably more popular film adaptation by Stanley Kubrick, released 3 years later. Having read the book and watched the movie, they're two very different animals but share the same basic premise. The Shining stars the Torrance family, Jack, Wendy, and their son, Danny. Jack takes a caretaker position for the Overlook Hotel while it's closed during the winter, so the Torrance family ends up staying an entire season there. Now, if you somehow don't know how the rest of the book or film goes, well, that's weird. But if you want to avoid spoilers, here's a timestamp for you. As the story goes on, the Torrance family, particularly Jack, slowly descend further and further into madness. Now, both the book and movie imply and establish that this is caused by lingering malevolent spirits, and also Jack already having a history of hurting his wife and child while under the influence of alcohol. However, you could definitely argue that the Overlook itself plays an important role in this mental decline. When it comes to naming true liminal spaces, spaces that are only meant to be passed through or used as a threshold, there's always a handful of places that come to mind. Airports, train stations, hotels. Normally you stay in a hotel for a short amount of time, a few days, maybe a week at most. Not to mention, the hotel normally isn't the destination, it's simply the place you sleep and rest in. The Overlook is a bit of an exception, since it's a resort hotel, but it's not meant to be stayed in during the winter. And the Torrance family was staying there for the entire winter, which meant they experienced the betwixt and between for far longer than they should have. You could also argue against the liminality of a hotel in general, of course. Even if the hotel itself isn't your destination for a getaway, it's still the grounding place you go back to rest. But there are other aspects in The Shining, other than the hotel itself, that could be considered liminal. When I asked my friend Cal what his favorite liminal space was, he said the hallway in The Shining, which hallways, well, you can't get more transitional than that. Hallways exist to get you from one room to another, and that's it. There's a lot of scenes with hallways, but I knew the one he was talking about. The most popular part in the movie, with the twins just standing there, menacingly. This hallway scene is so iconic that I don't think anyone who has seen it can go down a long hotel hallway without thinking about it. Long hotel hallways are to The Shining as foggy, empty streets are to Silent Hill. You simply cannot see them without mentioning the thing it reminds you of. Kubrick also emphasizes the feelings of isolation with some incredible shots, utilizing the vast emptiness of the Overlook Hotel, making the hotel itself purposely feel oppressive, rather than just the residents themselves. Though a place with an oppressive atmosphere wasn't exactly a novel concept at the time of the book or the movie's release. The Shining in particular just stands out to me as something that has entered the collective consciousness. Even if you've never seen it, you've most likely absorbed a lot of it through cultural osmosis, including the irrational fear of empty hotel hallways. That seems to be a trend with liminal spaces, doesn't it? Emptiness. Isolation. Does something need these aspects to be considered liminal? No, but someone in an in-between state may feel these feelings of isolation and not belonging, so one could argue that the use of emptiness does, in fact, add to the theme of liminality. Another aspect that I often see in stories or art depicting liminal spaces is spaces that are intentionally disorienting, which plays into Jennings and Turner's ideas that being in the liminal state is just that. Spaces that are ever-changing, labyrinthine, never-ending. Places that are impossibly spacious. One cannot write an essay on liminality without bringing up House of Leaves for some reason. Before starting this essay, I didn't know much about it, except that it's about an ever-changing, convoluted, never-ending house that many modern pieces of liminal media reference as inspiration. So instead of just reading a summary or watching a video essay on it, I took it upon myself to get the book and read it in full, so you could get my raw, unfiltered opinion on it.
Several days later.
I did it! One of the first things that stood out to me about this particular paperback was how the cover is slightly shorter in width than the rest of the book. It also has a little flap like a book sleeve, which is interesting since it's a paperback and doesn't have a book sleeve. In my first session reading this, I tried to use this flap as a bookmarker, but in trying to do so, I quickly realized it doesn't work. I bring this up because this set the entire tone of this book for me. Having something familiar that usually serves a certain purpose, not being able to serve that certain purpose. It was a small thing, but it was one of the first things that irked me about this book. Before I had actually decided to put the book down for the first time, I had been reading for what felt like hours and was like, wow, I must have put a huge dent in this book already, huh? I gotta be like over 50 pages in. I was on page 10. If you're unfamiliar with the basic premise of House of Leaves, it's like I said earlier. It's about a house with confusing maze-like architecture, but there are far more layers than that. It's about a sex and drug-addicted tattoo artist named Johnny Truant, who found and edited a research paper written by a recently deceased blind man about a documentary film about a house with confusing maze-like architecture. Yeah, it's a lot. The research paper is often interrupted by footnotes from Johnny, where he will often go on 5-page tangents about his multiple sexcapades and his deteriorating sanity adventure that very often parallels with the story beats in the actual film that is being covered, the Navidson record. It's a very intentionally disorienting way to tell a story, and now that I've finished the book, I definitely have an immense love-hate relationship with it. But hey, it's disorienting, and that is definitely a side effect of the liminal state that we have well established by now. But is the convoluted architecture of the House of Ash Tree Lane, often described in House of Leaves, actually liminal? Well, on page 153, Austrian historian Dagobert Frey is allegedly quoted saying, "Every house is an architecturally structured path. The specific possibilities of movement and the drives toward movement as one proceeds from the entrance through the sequence of spatial entities have been predetermined by the architectural structuring of that space, and one experiences the space accordingly. But at the same time, in its relation to the surrounding space, it is a goal, and we either advance toward this goal or depart from it." By Frey's likely fictitious interpretation of a house, yes, not only is the house in House of Leaves a liminal space, every house has the potential to be one. In the house on Ash Tree Lane, the confusing architecture that is most explored is a long, seemingly never-ending, winding hallway that seems to reflect the feelings and mental turmoil of the individuals who explore them. In particular, there is a stairwell that could take days to descend, or minutes, depending on who is descending it. Sometimes the stairwell extends and contracts, like an accordion. On pages 176 through 177, it is explained that a generalized mental picture of the exterior physical world is the product both of immediate sensation and of the memory of past experience, and the perception of space involves a gradual construction and certainly does not exist ready-made at the outset of mental development. All this to say, the point they're making is that our past experiences heavily affect our perception of the world around us. Have you ever gone to a playground or a daycare you used to go to as a kid and realized just how small everything looks now? That's of course because you're bigger now, but also because our minds tend to skew and distort things the longer we spend apart from them. Overall, I don't think this book could be considered liminal. Whether we're talking about the house or the story as a whole, I think it's actually something else. There's a particular German word House of Leaves brings up a few times. Unheimlich. Unheimlich is often translated to scary or uncanny, but it's a bit more complex than that. It quite literally means unhomely, and is referring specifically to that uncanny feeling you get when something familiar, like your home, no longer feels familiar. So a home you've come to get comfortable in suddenly growing an unending, unexplainable hallway that seems to swallow people up for days at a time, I'd say that's pretty unheimlich. In fact, I'd like you to remember unheimlich for the remainder of this video, because while I don't personally consider House of Leaves to be liminal, it has had a huge impact on the public's idea of liminality, and I feel that the lesser-known term unheimlich has become conflated with the modern understanding and definition of liminality. Now that we've covered a real place, a movie, and a book that I feel have affected the modern understanding of liminal spaces, how about we move on to something scarier? The internet. You may often find yourself looking at a popular thing on the internet and thinking, I wonder how this got popular. Rickrolling, lolcats, My Little Pony, various memes, creepypasta, and of course, liminal spaces. The catalyst for all of these things is very often 4chan. If by chance you aren't familiar with 4chan, good. It is an anonymous image board that many would consider a progenitor to modern Reddit culture. Back in the early 2000s, it was what I would consider a product of the Wild West of the internet. Oftentimes, while perusing the boards of 4chan, you would come across a certain type of thread where people were sharing the most disturbing images they could possibly find. There were many names of these threads: cursed images, disturbing images, mindfucks. These images, and sometimes videos, could range anywhere from a funny spot the ghost image that actually just says "the game" very faintly in the corner, to images that gave every single millennial trypophobia, to photos of actual dead bodies. One board in particular that loved this flavor of thread was X. No, not that X, the paranormal board. Alongside the Something Awful forum, X was also partially responsible for the spread of creepypasta. One of my favorite pastimes as a teenager was poring over these cursed image threads on the paranormal board, often at my detriment, because sometimes I'd come across an image that would tuck its way into the folds of my brain and never leave, and then I wouldn't sleep. All this to say, sharing context-free images that are disturbing, whether it be subtle or rather over the top, became a huge staple in many corners of the internet. It's continued to be a trend from the early 2000s to today, and different flavors of disturbing or creepy content have been introduced over time. Taking a look at our handy-dandy Google Trends, it seems that a lot of the earliest mentions of liminal spaces can be found in the early 2010s. In fact, I found an article from 2011 by an English teacher named Lily Marshall. Lily gushes to us about her train ride from Boston to New York City, and shares with us her charmingly blurry photos taken of the passing scenery. She correctly defines and explains liminal spaces as the places in between point A to point B, saying how they're important. Confusing? Sometimes. Misunderstood and sometimes ignored? Sure. But important? Without a doubt. Her words resonate with me. I am a huge fan of road tripping, which probably contributes heavily to my love of liminal spaces in the first place. Some of my favorite feelings I've collected on said road trips are gathered at gas stations in the dead of night. I believe it was a trip from Florida to Oklahoma I had, or it was either late at night or early morning. I stopped at a gas station to fuel up, but also needed to use the restroom. The gas station, oddly, was more than that. It was kind of huge for no reason. It wasn't like a Buc-ee's or a supermarket inside, but the trip to the bathroom was through many wide, carpeted hallways. There was an arcade, or at least an attempt at one. It reminded me somewhat of the hallways in movie theaters, where sometimes you'd turn a corner and there'd be a few arcade cabinets against the wall. No one was there, though. Just the disquieting sounds of the looping arcade cabinet demos. Despite the oddities of this situation, the darkness, the quiet, it was a very comforting experience that I don't think I'll soon forget. Gas stations at night are some of my favorite liminal spaces. They feel less like loading screens and more like save points. This wouldn't be a video essay on liminality without me bringing up at least one SCP. The Special Containment Procedures Foundation is yet another spooky internet phenomena that exists thanks to, you guessed it, the paranormal board on 4chan. It is a collaborative writing project where anyone can contribute, creating all sorts of different anomalies that need to be contained by the SCP Foundation. It is, admittedly, a scene I never got deep into, but I can definitely appreciate a fun, continuous, collaborative project like this. The SCP I'm zeroing in on is 087, which is an endless stairwell. It reminds me of the perpetual spiraling stairwell in House of Leaves even, which, as you can well imagine, there are several SCPs that, whether intentionally or not, pull from the same themes as House of Leaves. SCP-087 had a video game adaptation created that got somewhat popular. In the early 2010s, we had indie horror gems such as Amnesia: The Dark Descent and Slender go viral, thanks to a trend of content creators recording themselves reacting to said horror games. PewDiePie, Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, these were all the heavy hitters that made it big in the early 2010s with horror games like this. The game was relatively simple, utilizing darkness and monotony to keep the player on edge, relying mostly on the player's imagination as a scare tactic and using only very subtle scares itself. It's fairly effective and short, about a 30-minute runtime. I bring this game up because I consider it one of the earliest examples of a liminal horror game, before liminal horror was really an established genre. Many people may disagree with me, as people often discuss liminality of PS1 and 64 games, but I don't know about that, man. However, there is no denying the liminality of a staircase as much as the liminality of an elevator. Both's entire purpose is to get you from one floor to the next, and SCP-087 traps you in that state of liminality for far too long. But of course, I think there's a much more popular, much more influential game that shaped the culture around the liminality as we know it today. The Stanley Parable. One of the most interesting walking simulators I've ever had the pleasure of playing. And I must clarify, I mean this affectionately. Some of my favorite games are walking simulators or playable movies or novels. The Stanley Parable is a game that was originally released in 2011 as a mod for Half-Life 2, but had its own standalone release on Steam in 2013. You play as the silent protagonist, Stanley, haunted by the voice of a British man, telling him where to go and what to do, traversing through the mundanity of empty office cubicles and hallways, and you, the controller of Stanley, can decide whether or not you want to listen to this seemingly omniscient British man.
Stanley took the first open door on his left. Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago.
So I'm going to ask the question. This game is often referred to as being liminal, but I must ask this genuinely. Is this game actually liminal? A good bit of the game is running through a lot of samey hallways and stairwells over and over. I think it scratches the itch, but I personally think it dwells more within the existential and meta realms a bit more than the liminal. Now, if you muted the narrator entirely... Okay, this kind of sucks. I don't want to go too deep into Stanley Parable's whole deal because it's one of those games you really have to experience for yourself, but it absolutely has a vibe. It's mostly very funny and will make you laugh out loud a lot, but it absolutely uses emptiness, disorientation, and mundanity, and a seemingly endless world, with the original Steam release of Stanley Parable having 19 unique endings to create a sense of growing dread within the player. Much like another story. Wow, another SCP so soon? Yeah, SCPs play a heavy role in liminality. Just trust me on this. SCP-3008 is none other than the tale of the infinite IKEA. To quote the SCP entry directly, a person entering SCP-3008 through the main entrance and then passing out of sight of the doors will find themselves translocated to SCP-3008-1. This displacement will typically go unnoticed, as no change will occur from the perspective of the victim. They will generally not become aware until they try to return to the entrance. SCP-3008-1 is a space resembling the inside of an IKEA furniture store, extending far beyond the limits of what would physically be contained within the dimensions of the retail unit. Current measurements indicate an area of at least 10 kilometers squared, with no visible external terminators detected in any direction. Inconclusive results from the use of laser rangefinders has led to the speculation that the space may be infinite. The entry goes on to explain that the store contains humanoid entities that resemble IKEA store employees if they had exaggerated proportions and absolutely no facial features. They also are known to become hostile during closing hours. Wow! Not only does this sound like House of Leaves, but this sounds like a small touch of mascotification, though I wouldn't consider this a bad thing. The scary monster employees, also known as SCP-3008-2s, are pretty fun, and I like their concept. This also isn't liminal! It's yet another case of unheimlich. Taking a familiar thing like a furniture store most people know and moving it off-center to make it disturbing and uncomfortable. Gee, Spoonie, you're bringing up a lot of things that aren't liminal in this video essay about liminality. You see, there's a reason I brought up the story about the IKEA where, if you pass out of sight of the doors, you'll end up in SCP-3008-1, where it's nothing but the stink of old, moist furniture, the madness of blue and yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. Back in May of 2019, someone on X started a thread specifically asking for disquieting images that just feel off. While most of these photos aren't liminal in the traditional sense, many of them evoke a sense of dread that's sometimes hard to pinpoint why. Oftentimes it's a question that doesn't have an obvious answer. Sometimes it's your mind playing tricks on you. Sometimes it feels like something could be just out of frame. Or it's just another case of unheimlich. The famous copypasta was posted in this thread upon someone asking what the picture was. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. With this story, even if it is very similar to SCP-3008's, there's definitely more of an aspect of liminality, and it's with the mention of no-clipping through reality. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of no-clipping, it's when you turn off collision in a video game and are able to phase through walls.
Guys.
This is generally used as a fast means of travel. If I lose all my stuff in Valheim, I'll cheat and turn on no-clipping and fly through the air to get back my stuff, then turn it back off. It's simply a temporary state we go in to travel from point A to point B, but the concept of no-clipping through reality, well, I can't really deny that that's a state of being betwixt and between. Guys, even if I wouldn't consider the backrooms itself a means to get from one point to another, it's simply a state of being stuck in the in-between. At least, that's the implication I'm getting from these two sentences. My friend who helped me edit this also mentioned, that I should also go into how clipping out of bounds can happen even without turning no clip on if there's a gap in the level's geometry. That's an oversight on my part, because nobody no clips into the backrooms on purpose in the stories I have come across about the backrooms. This is a place that you're not supposed to see. This is a place that you accidentally slip into, that is between planes, between realms. There's a glitch in the matrix, and you fall through the cracks. This part is unscripted, so I don't sound very intelligent. Please don't mind me. On top of the so-called state of liminality that the Backrooms has, there are a few other things worth noting about this original post. The fluorescent hum of the lights, the emptiness, the endlessness, the mere suggestion that there might be something there. These are all aspects and concepts that aren't new to the idea of liminality, but they were popularized by the Backrooms. They aren't requirements to make a space liminal, but often all you need is at least one thing from this list for the masses to consider it liminal. Hell, even the color yellow is liminal now. Piss filtered? That's liminal now, baby. Around the same time the concept of the Backrooms started getting popular, there was also a post on Tumblr that blew up. As of right now, it has over 1.2 million notes. The post goes on to list several different places where reality is a bit altered. Rest stops on highways, trails by the highway just out of earshot of traffic, your friend's living room once everybody but you is asleep. Any target. That was my fault, sorry. In case you were confused as to why any of these places give you a weird feeling or the reality feels a bit altered, well, Tumblr user, you deserve a rink got you covered. Okay, listen, there are reasons for this. A lot of these places are called liminal spaces, which means they are throughways from one space to the next. Places like rest stops, stairwells, trains, parking lots, waiting rooms, airports feel weird when you're in them because their existence is not about themselves, but the things before and after them. They have no definitive place outside of their relationship to the spaces you are coming from and going to. Reality feels altered here because we're not really supposed to be in them for a long time. Okay. I'm with you so far. Or think about them as their own entities, and when we do, they seem odd and out of place. Kinda losing me, but alright. The other spaces feel weird because our brains are hardwired for context. We like things to belong to a certain place and time, and when we experience those things outside of the context our brains have developed for them, our brains are like, nope, shit, this isn't right, get out, abort, abort. School's not in session, empty museums, being awake when other people are asleep. All these things and spaces feel weird because our brain is like, I already have context for this space and this is not it, so it must be dangerous. Our rational understanding can sometimes override that immediate danger impulse, but we're still left with a feeling of wariness and unease. Hold on, what? So this post blew up, over 1 million people were exposed to it, and had their feelings about empty parking lots explained with pseudopsychology from Miranda on Tumblr. So, the Backrooms blow up, this post on Tumblr blows up, and liminal spaces has now entered the internet's more common vernacular. The Backrooms fairly quickly had a lot of fan games made based on it, as well as some found footage films. Most notably the series of short films by Kane Pixels in 2022. But hold up. That wasn't until 2022, 3 years after the Backrooms copy pasta was originally posted. Let's slow down a bit and familiarize ourselves with the evolved form of cursed photo threads. So not long after the backrooms got popular, a Reddit board specifically for posting liminal space photographs was created. As of writing this essay, the board has 192,000 weekly visitors, so I'd say it's still going strong. I'd also like to point out, this board was created a few months before that Tumblr post, so while I do think the Tumblr post did contribute a bit to the spread of the concept of liminal spaces, it's fairly likely the original poster was inspired by photos from this Reddit board. Anyway, the liminal space board absolutely helped popularize some of the liminal space staples, such as weird hotel, the end is near borders, empty parking garages, empty maintenance halls, empty mall playground number 1, dark empty indoor playground, empty local arcade, empty mall playground number 2, empty corner of a daycare, empty room except for a Christmas tree, another empty indoor playground, empty Blockbuster. Okay, I'm noticing a pattern here. Aside from the emptiness pattern that was always destined to be an aspect of liminal horror, it seems there's another factor I can't help but notice. Did you notice it too? How many of these places have been lost to time? How many of these allegedly liminal spaces feel like places you've seen or been to before? Feel nostalgic? Now, that's all relative. Whether or not you felt nostalgia over any of these images is based entirely on your upbringing, your age, where you live. If you're an American millennial or Zoomer, there's a high likelihood that some of these photos feel like they unlock memories. Completely naturally, a quality that liminal space photography adapted was the nostalgia element. Photos of things completely lost to time, often abandoned, often dark and sad. I'd like to remind everyone of the time period we're currently in. Liminal spaces became more of a concept late 2019 and continued to be a trend well into 2020. You know, 2020. When there was a global pandemic and everyone had to stay indoors because no one knew what the fuck was going on? Yeah, that one. So this is merely speculation, but I think the nostalgia element of liminal space photography naturally wormed its way into the art of liminal photography because of a sense of longing for times long past, exacerbated by the fact that everyone, except for essential workers, was trapped in their home for basically 3 years. Not to mention all the imagery we were assaulted with of places normally teeming with life, entirely deserted, in broad daylight during lockdown. It was genuinely disturbing, if not traumatic. One of my friends who helped me edit this script pointed out, you could even argue a part of this kind of horror is the implied lack of protection. If something is with you, like a deadly virus, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. I understand why people would turn to this evolving art form as catharsis. It's a collective mourning of a time you already knew you wouldn't be able to return to, but now it's solidified. In this article from Vice by Andrew Lloyd, Chris Fruward, who was 16 when he discovered the image that inspired the Backrooms creepypasta and one of the first people to write a short story about it, had this to say about it. So many people grew up in the odd transitional period of the 2000s, where things from the past sat almost completely unchanged, unmaintained, buildings unrenovated. It's just one of those odd shared experiences. A lot of the common locations in my life up to that point were these older, slightly run-down buildings with dated interior design and very odd auras surrounding them. The Backrooms is the perfect culmination of this. As a millennial who saw the transition from the 90s to the 2000s in real time, I get what Fruward is saying. There's this, dare I say it, liminal state that time feels like it hit in the early 2000s. I remember my school in 1999 having a mural on the wall of the cafeteria that said, "The future is bright!" And everyone was wearing glasses that said 2000. The year 2000 just sounded so novel, so fantastic. I learned the word millennium that year, and I kept finding excuses to use it. Then the 2000s came, and they stayed. Nothing felt different. The more time went on, the more things felt like they were stagnating. The Sightless King on the Liminal Space Reddit board put it better than I ever could. Imagine the 1910s onward. Each decade distinctly defined, stretching for an entire century. The sense of cultural momentum was tangible. Decades had distinct sounds, aesthetics, and ideologies. A song from the 1970s played in the 1950s would have felt alien. Since the late 90s, history hasn't so much progressed as it has looped, stalled, and collapsed inward. The forward march of culture has slowed to a near standstill, replaced by an ever-intensifying nostalgia feedback loop. Why do liminal spaces so often evoke the feeling of a memory, a childhood place that exists in a superposition of both having happened and never having happened at all? Why does this all feel so inherently right for horror? Because this is horror. A novel kind of horror. One that taps into the deepest existential dread and truth of our era. We live in the past because there is no future ahead of us. So it's been a bit. How about we check in on what's going on with the backrooms? Let's see here, the backrooms wiki, level 0, level 1, level How many levels are what is 42? What is unsafe, unsecure, low entity count, level 64? Okay. What? Mere days after the original post on 4chan's paranormal board, the creepypasta subreddit became flooded with fiction for the backrooms. Literally 4 days after the original post was created, there was a backroom subreddit created. 4 days, over 2 sentences. Fairly swiftly, the idea of the backrooms having multiple levels was introduced, including, but not limited to, Level 0, based on the original image of the backrooms. Level 1, empty parking garage. Level 2, empty maintenance halls. Wait
a minute!
Are you seeing this? They're just using popular photos of liminal spaces and conflating them with the backrooms. So is just any liminal space photograph just part of the backrooms now? Anyway, next level is... the pool rooms, based on a series of renders made in Blender by Jared Pike, called Dream Pools. Pike describes Dream Pools as a digital series exploring eerie nostalgia through endless pool environments, blurring the line between dreamlike states and conscious reality. Eerie nostalgia, endless, dreamlike. All words that us liminality perverts love to hear. However, I'd like to point out that while dreamlike has absolutely been a common factor of liminal space photography, I think that Pike's Dream Pools series really made dreamlike move to the forefront of everyone's minds when it came to the unofficial requirements for spaces to be considered liminal. Additionally, this could also be at least partially to blame for the emergence of the internet aesthetic dreamcore, which, if I'm understanding correctly, embraces the more dreamlike quality of liminal spaces, often editing in eyes, angels, mushrooms to give it that je ne sais quoi. And if you can believe it, dreamcore indirectly influenced the emergence of another internet aesthetic known as nostalgiacore, which, as you can well imagine, has focus on bittersweet appreciation of childhood memories. So, you know, something trapped in a cultural Ouroboros, something global trauma, yada yada. I'm just now noticing how many fucking times I've said "as you can well imagine." It makes me sound smart. I don't know. Not long after people started adding layers and, God forbid, entities to the backrooms, there was a schism in the newly emerged backrooms fandom, so much so that there was another subreddit created called true backrooms, with less focus on the mass codification of the backrooms. Over the past 6 years, the Backrooms has generated multiple fan games, short films, writings, and if you look at the Backrooms Wikidot or Fandom wiki pages, like, holy fucking shit, dude. As of writing this video essay, not only are there 1,000 levels, but there are levels with decimals, 9.1, 9.2, 9.31, 9.55, all of these levels being contributions by fans of the Backrooms. There's also several entries for entities, objects, phenomena, and are you starting to see what this has become? It's just the SCP Foundation, but the Backrooms! I must clarify, I don't hate this. Collaborative projects like this are very fun and exciting. It just boggles my mind as someone who only really had secondhand knowledge of the Backrooms before writing the script for this video. The extent of my Backrooms knowledge used to be playing shitty Backrooms games with my friends, eating moth jelly, and drinking almond water to restore my sanity. Give me that almond water. Yeah! Side note, I couldn't pinpoint an exact source for this, but I did catch a lot of people talking about how almond water became a restorative item in the Backrooms lore because there was some piece of writing that mentioned the scent of almonds, so likely referring to the deadly poison cyanide, and someone took that too literally and ran with it, and now we have almond water. In my honest opinion, while I do love a good collaborative art project and I'm happy people are having fun, having a massive log of all the different levels, objects, monsters, etc., of the Backrooms completely defeats the entire purpose of the original 2-sentence post, which was, the less you know, the better. The reason the Backrooms was scary in the first place was because it was endlessly empty, and there was a mere suggestion that something could be lurking around the corner. The truest, most terrifying horror is the kind we do not see. The quiet horror. The horror lurking, perhaps just out of frame. So, having logs and descriptions on all the different things you can come across in the Backrooms, well, that doesn't really work. The original post read as a very fleeting, very passing thought that didn't and shouldn't have been expanded upon or lingered in for too long. You know, like a liminal space. When liminal horror first became popular, I didn't get it. Oftentimes, liminal spaces are portrayed as places that are normally bustling with people completely devoid of life. Theme parks, malls, movie theaters, we've said all these already. Seeing empty spaces like this never frightened or unnerved me. In fact, they were often very relaxing sights to me, because I experienced them regularly in my daily life. You see, I grew up in Central Florida, which would be a liminal space altogether for many people who are simply going for a vacation to Disney World. But I lived there, and I worked there. I worked at the parks for 3 whole years, then went on to work at Target for 6. There was nothing unnerving to me about the parks or the store being empty. To me, that was peace. That was tranquility. I could relax because my shift was either just beginning or about to end. In that case, you could probably argue that my state was not liminal at all. It was either preliminal or post-liminal, but you know, details. I thought the people who admitted to being genuinely disturbed by large empty spaces that were usually filled with people were just telling on themselves, specifically on how they didn't have a lot of life experience. To me, existing in big, empty spaces was a normal part of life. It wasn't even exclusive to growing up in a resort town either. I'm sure a lot of retail workers across the globe have had similar feelings about so-called liminal spaces. The first time I actually got liminal spaces, though, was when I played a little indie horror game called Interior Worlds by Soda Raptor. Highly recommend their work, it's fantastic. In Interior Worlds, you explore many popular destinations that have been considered liminal. A parking garage, hotel, mall, theater, we've said all these. The goal of the game is to simply take photos of anomalies, little clouds of smoke that just act as points of interest. The game isn't in your face scary at all, but there's always that suggestion, that feeling that around every corner there could be something lurking. And well, sometimes there is. Not gonna lie, these little alien guys made me jump a few times, but they're not like monsters or anything, they just big chillin'. Plus, at the end of the game, you get to look through all your photos you took, and it's absolutely delightful. Something about going through a game that created tension by simply being in open, large spaces, having to take photos in weird, creepy spots, then seeing the results of your work makes you go, huh, it's not so scary after all, is it? I enjoyed this game so much, it caused me to pick up the hobby of taking my own liminal photos, even making a channel in my Discord server for people in the community to contribute their own pictures. I use these photos we all share with each other to make my streams Be Right Back screen, and update it every so often with any new ones that people post. I love these slideshows more than anything. It's a small comfort to know that we're all out there in the world, viewing it through the same lens of disquieting but somehow comfortable emptiness. And we get to share those feelings with each other. And I've thought, many times, maybe that's the same unifying feeling that brings people back to our liminal spaces, to the backrooms, to the SCP Foundation even. Maybe it just feels good to share creepy stories together, whether it's contextless or not. The channel where my community members post their liminal photos only has 3 rules. 1, it's a photo you have taken, or someone close to you got permission from. 2, there are no distinguishable people in the shot, silhouettes are okay. 3, there are no street names or things in the photo that would reveal too much about your own personal location. So really, is that all it takes for something to be considered liminal nowadays? What does liminality even mean now? People often use it interchangeably with spooky, unnerving, empty, surreal. Has the definition of liminality really degraded over time? Or has it just broadened? Is liminality itself in a state of liminality? To me, liminality still embraces that feeling of being betwixt and between, not quite belonging, but passing through to the other side. Liminal photos evoke questions. Where is this? Where am I? Is anyone there? What's on the other side? Much how being in a state of flux would inspire the same types of questions. The most liminal space I've ever experienced in my day-to-day life has been a home after someone had moved out. I have moved upwards of 20 times in my lifetime, but there's never been anything eerier to me than seeing your whole life for the past year or a few years get neatly packed away into boxes. It's why I started working on a game called What's Left, where you clean up after tenants who've moved out and have left things behind. There's something so incredibly disturbing about a home that's no longer lived in, with little remnants of the past still lingering within. That's right. This whole video has been a ruse! I've tricked you! This whole video was just a ploy to advertise my indie horror game! Not really, but I did want to bring it up since it was relevant. There were several points during the course of this video essay's creation where I stopped and asked my audience questions about liminality, and quickly realized not a lot of people really know the textbook definition of liminality anymore. It's either someplace empty, foggy, dark, nostalgic, surreal, dreamlike, or just vaguely creepy. Perhaps nowadays, in order for something to be considered liminal, all it really needs is to have that feeling of not belonging, isolation, disorientation, the feelings that being in a liminal state end up causing. Many liminal spaces we see today aren't liminal by the original definition at all, and some would even say that we have lost the plot with liminality entirely. But language is ever-changing and evolving. Nowadays, there are many things released that have been inspired by liminal spaces. My favorite and only Spot the Anomaly game I really like is The Exit 8, which not only is liminal in every sense of the word, taking place in a nearly endless looping subway station, but also has the humbuzz of the fluorescent lights like the backrooms. I'd also argue this is another example of unheimlich. It's both liminal and unheimlich. We found it! The ultimate liminal media! The Exit 8 also had a movie adaptation made of it, and it's honestly been my favorite video game movie I've ever seen. The writers of Severance have cited the Stanley Parable and The Backrooms as inspiration, and Severance is my favorite TV show. American Horror Story even had a reference to the Backrooms, and hey, there's a Backrooms movie now that's even directed by Kane Pixels, who made the original Backrooms shorts that popularized the Scrimblow Bimblow guy, so I don't know, I hope this guy isn't in it. Honestly, not a fan of the Scrimbler. Liminality has become a fairly all-encompassing word, but it's far more than just an abandoned parking lot, vast emptiness of an unfinished N64 game, or picture of a dark, creepy hallway. It's the suggestion that these places are something more, that there's something hiding deep within them, whether that be a monster or an old memory. It's that unknowable quality, that pit in your stomach, when you realize you're not where you're supposed to be. Liminal spaces are important. Confusing? Sometimes. Misunderstood? And sometimes ignored? Sure. But important? Without a doubt. Something I couldn't find a place to actually talk about this, but a funny trend I've noticed regarding liminality is people talking about the liminality of older games. Why? Probably because they're often very empty and simplistic. But what I find extremely funny is no one is pointing out what's obviously the most liminal part of video games. The loading screen. Wow. So liminal. Meowdy, thanks for watching. This has been my first hour-long video essay, so it's been a trip. I'd like to thank my friends Jet Vector and Capri Soda for going over the script of this essay and giving me their feedback. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate you so much. I'd also like to thank the community for providing the abundance of photographs used throughout the video. This video wouldn't be the same without your contributions. Speaking of making this video possible, I'd like to thank all my patrons, members, and Twitch subscribers. This video would not have been made without your help, so genuinely, thank you. If you'd like to support the creation of my next video essay, consider joining my Patreon, Ko-fi, or becoming a member right here on YouTube. Even just $1 really helps out. Plus, you get the privilege of voting on what I talk about next, what games I stream, and get to see videos like this a week early, and plenty more. I would especially like to thank those on the top tier on my Patreon: Dev, Proxy Glitchcat, Max Capacity Go, Plompy, Video Ghost, Victor DeGemi, Jordan, Scorch, Sheeb Inu, Aaron Masher, JM Racing Fox, Zeehee, Verflare, Corgi. Then those on the merch tier: Roneberg, Maddie, Crystal Rain, Jack, Audie. Then those on the gamer tier: Renwolf, Matt Frostpaws, Heretic Soul, Jay, Opus 13, Saxon Fox, Ina Koneko, Roaming Rovion, Mahudin Zin, Danny81, Vesuvius Artorius, Bash Something, Dusk Saint, Kaylin Aldene, Panzica, Dupli Fox, and Rogue Spike. Thank you all so much for your support. Again, this video wouldn't be the same without you. So, I'll see you guys next time. We'll see what we talk about next. And I'll probably look different. We will see.